Welcome to The Learning Hack, a podcast about the people and technologies that are creating the future of learning. I'm John Helmer.
Now guess what? Learning is cool. Learning is cool. Learning is cool.
Thomas Cook went into compulsory liquidation recently, making 22,000 staff unemployed overnight. Among those to lose their jobs was the inspirational head of learning, Caroline Ford, who I'm lucky enough to have as my guest on this episode of The Learning Hack. Caroline has an amazing story to tell. You'll hear about how she turned things around after a disastrous top-down restructuring of the learning department a few years back, and the astonishing results she achieved on next to no budget. Thomas Cook doesn't exist anymore, so she's shooting from the hip, and she has stacks of good advice. Let's face it, learning people are always being asked to do more with less, so you're bound to get something out of this episode. We had some challenges fitting in our chat, and I'm very grateful to Caroline for interrupting a well-deserved break in Marrakesh to do it. And no, she didn't book the holiday through Thomas Cook. Caroline, welcome. It's never a great day when you lose your job. In this case, it was also a huge news story and sad demise of a 178-year-old company that originated the package holiday in a way. And also, a terrible problem for all those holidaymakers stranded abroad and so on. But how did that day feel for you? How did that experience feel for you?
I was just really sad to see such a great British company disappear, and deeply affected to see so many of my colleagues lose their jobs, sometimes multiple job losses in the same family. Sad to see my team go after so much hard work, such a great team, such really talented people. And, some of them have already gone on to do amazing new roles. They're moving on, they're being snapped up, and I'm not surprised really. But I am overall extremely grateful to have had the opportunity to work for the world's oldest travel company. And I feel privileged to have worked with some of the best and most talented people I've ever met in my career.
I gather the company's financial problems went back a bit of a way before that.
Yes, John, the travel industry, unfortunately, is very vulnerable to geographical influences, terrorism, natural disasters and so on. And unfortunately, since the early 2000s, Thomas Cook had been exposed to a fair few of all of these difficult situations. And that was exacerbated because one of the CEOs had gone on something of a spending spree and had purchased a huge amount of retail stores by taking over the My Travel business. And he'd done this just at a time really when the balance was tipping from consumer spending being through traditional retail networks into a more digital and online way of buying. And a lady called Harriet Green was brought in to come and transform the business in 2012. And to help her do that, she brought in McKinsey's, and she made some really quite radical restructuring decisions. And unfortunately, one of the functions that was directly affected by the restructuring was the learning and development function. And of course, it can often look to someone not in that world as something of a luxury.
So tell us about the effect that had on learning at Thomas Cook.
She cut that back substantially, and what that meant was historically there had been a quite large field learning and development team that supported the retail network, and also quite a large dedicated learning and development team covering the two contact centres, both of which had about 300 colleagues in them. And those two teams between them probably had around about 50 to 60 trainers, both out in the field and out in the contact centres, inducting, upskilling and embedding learning all of the time and reinforcing good practices. Now, that network of trainers was stripped right back to the absolute bare minimum. So there was an operational training team, and it was based out of Peterborough, but it had 3 field trainers and 3 trainers that were based in Peterborough. And that was to cover the retail network and the contact centre network of approximately 7,000 people between the two. So that is an absolute huge ratio. I mean, my trainers were working roughly at a ratio of 1 to 1,000. Now, I sometimes hear people say to me a ratio of 1 to 200 is quite a tight ratio. Mine were working at 1 to 1,000. So we had that going on, and then there had been a transition from classroom training into online training as a cost-saving exercise. So an e-learning team of online design experts had been put in place, and the purpose of that was to subsidise that classroom training reduction with great quality e-learning. And they'd put in place a very small team, really. There were 4 e-learning designers supported with a graphic designer. Both the operational training team and the e-learning team had a dedicated manager. But I mean, those are very, very, very minimal levels of training expertise to be looking after a workforce the size that we were looking after at that time.
So when that structure was put in place, Caroline, had there been any consultation with the business, any involvement from L&D and other business leaders?
Well, John, no, they hadn't been consulted and involved in that structure, actually. It had been one of those, I guess, difficult business decisions that the HR team had been told they needed to cut their headcount, and they had done everything they could to really, really tighten the purse strings the best way they knew how. But actually, had those business leaders really been consulted and involved at the time that happened? No, probably not. When I came in to look after the learning and development function for the UK and Ireland, one of the first things I did was speak to the head of contact centre, and she did say to me that she was really disappointed with the learning and development structure. And actually, she had been asked to put in place a subsidy kind of model. So she'd been asked to look at her people in her contact centre and find the best subject matter experts in there, and then to have them trained up by us as kind of substitute trainers, if you will. And that model just didn't work at all. The learning and development function should have been doing much more train to train with these people, should have been doing much more pastoral care with these people, and in my opinion should have been doing the scheduling of the training and taking on much more of an advisory role with the contact centre about how to do training, where to recruit people to get the best learning output, and then how to help them with their career development and their upskilling in order to help with retention and so on moving forward. And none of that was happening. And I think when you're taking valuable subject matter experts off the phone, and they're not trained to deliver training, it can be absolutely catastrophic. And the situation that we found ourselves in a number of different areas, both in retail and in the contact centre, was the training and development we were offering just was not where it needed to be, and there were multiple problems being seen as a direct result of that.
So what did you do to turn it around?
Well, actually, the first place that we started was by building relationships, John. I took my 2 teams, which were the operational training team and the online design team, right back to basics. And we started by mapping out who our stakeholders were. And we looked at how senior they were, how powerful they were, how interested they were. And we also looked back at the kind of experience we thought they'd been having over the last few years of the learning and development function. And then we went and we had a cup of tea with all of them. And we started actually with the director for retail and contact centres, and we took the head of HR business partnering with us to that for retail and contact centres. So it was a real partnership approach. And we also took along the head of Retail South. So one of her operational key managers came along to that meeting, and we sat down and said, look, what's working for you? What's not working for you? What's keeping you awake at night? And what she said was, I have so much keeping me awake, I don't really know where to start. But let me tell you one thing that really, really is keeping me awake at night, and that is the retail induction. And so that's where we started. And working in partnership with this group of people and engaging operational managers from various parts of the retail network, store managers and colleagues, we started to look at where were we now with the retail network and the retail induction in particular, and where was it that we wanted to get to. And we found when we did our research that actually we had some really disturbing challenges with this. So at that time, the retail induction was done out in the field. So we had a number of really quite dilapidated induction training rooms that were around the country, often on top of stores. They hadn't been invested in for many, many years, and they didn't give a great first impression when people were coming along for their induction. And the induction was split into two different ways. The first was a one-day welcome to the group, and then some time later, days, it could be weeks, depending when the schedule was done, they would then come back in for a 2-day sales training. And when we had a look at the attendance levels, we discovered that 90% of people were coming on the welcome to the group day. Now, you might think that's quite high, and it is, but that meant 10% of people weren't getting any information about the company strategy, the company culture, the values, the mantra of customer at our heart, or product training, or any of that stuff. There was a very heavy reliance on e-learning. We discovered that we actually had in the induction program 48 e-learning modules, 48, and the induction was spread out over a 6 to 8 week period. But actually, if you were a very part-time worker in retail, for example, only working 16 hours a week, when we actually did the maths, doing that induction could take you almost 12 months. Now, an induction that takes 12 months is not an induction at all. You're miles off. So we had that to deal with. And then when we looked at the number of people that were coming on the very important sales training, it was 60%. So only 60% of the people came back and had the sales training. And then when we looked at the cost of bringing people into these regional training rooms, which weren't very nice, I'll remind you of that again, we discovered actually it was quite costly, because if you're paying travel and expenses for people to come in from a variety of stores in a regional location, some of them it could be 2 hours away. They may still have to stay overnight in some cases locally. And we thought that was a really big contributing factor to why people would come to perhaps the first day, but then not the sales training thereafter. And when we spoke to people, all of these things were absolutely true. They were saying it wasn't a great experience for them, and the store managers were telling us that the induction was too long, the content wasn't right, and the learner, the new joiner, didn't actually feel part of a really big group like Thomas Cook, because effectively they were going into a small shop in a town centre and never experiencing the group head office environment. So the very first thing that we did was fix this, and it was great. You know, we built some really amazing relations with the people in retail, and those people heavily contributed to the content, the structure and the timing of that new retail induction. And it delivered some absolutely incredible results. In fact, we won a Training Journal award for Best Operational Training Programme in the year that we launched it. And just to give you just a couple of examples of the effect that this actually had on the retail network, attendance increased on that sales training from 60% to 100% immediately and was retained at that level. Attrition levels in the first 8 months of the year that we put in the new induction halved from 15% to 6%. And new joiner productivity, which was expressed as a percentage of target achieved, was up by 15% year on year for those people who joined in that first period. And that benefit was retained in those people. They continued to perform higher than the rest of the network who had not been through that induction as an ongoing process. And we tested that again at a year and 18 months down the line. And earnings per consultant in the first 3 months of going live into a store were up by £1,467 per consultant. And, you know, just those type of measures demonstrates that what we put in place had a really profound effect. But it was quite an old-fashioned solution that we put in place to resolve this, you know. We went out and we had a look at what other retailers were doing, and we didn't just look at travel retailers like our nearest and dearest competitors such as TUI and Jet2. We actually looked at other high street retailers such as Vodafone and John Lewis and other retailers that sold similarly complex products and who also had contact centres that were partnered with their retail business, so offering a back-end support service. And we discovered that many of them did what we thought was quite old-fashioned. They actually still brought people in to a head office environment for residential training, and so that's what we did. We brought them in for 1 week's residential training. We provided a diary that they completed during their 5-week induction, so we reduced it, but we gave them 1 week of socialisation in their store. The second week was when they came to the head office and they were inducted and immersed in product and sales and service and values and strategy. And then the remaining 3 weeks they had a series of very tightly organised and carefully selected e-learning modules and some in-store activities that were monitored and signed off by their managers. And ultimately that is what drove those results. It was a really close look at what do the best retailers and you know, hybrid businesses do, what can we learn from them and how might we do that. And you know what, you might think that this would be counterintuitive and expensive, and on paper it does look like it could be, but you've got to remember you're offsetting it against that return on investment, and we thought we would get that. And actually what we were able to do was bring these people in and train them on a 4-day residential for under £250 per person, and we negotiated very closely with the hotels in the area, and actually we put people into twin-bedded rooms, and this is not normal in this day and age at all, but we said if you want to be part of this amazing journey and you want to have this great learning experience, you're going to need to compromise a little bit, but in return we will give you a great learning experience. And it really played out in the commercials, and that was brilliant. It was great. It was our first win.
Putting a learning management system in place is only half the battle. In some ways it's the easiest part. Getting your people engaged with the LMS, knowing whether it's actually driving results, that's tough. And with providers locked into their roadmaps, who can you get to help you with custom portals, gamification, out-of-the-box reports, and all those changes you need done yesterday to make your LMS truly yours? Earthly Systems provide expert customization services for LMS. They'll make a rapid response that drives maximum value from your investment, with any functionality they add easily configurable by non-technical staff. And exclusively for listeners to this podcast, Earthly are offering a 25% discount on your first project. Go to earthlysystems.com now and quote the words Learning Hack when you enter your details on the contact page. Earthly helps make the learning land. How's that for a cheesy tagline? So to be clear, you were doing this still under really tight budget limits, which is why you had to negotiate every deal hard and look at the costs very carefully on everything. So was the lack of cash just a spur to creativity, or did it mean you had to accept some painful sacrifices?
Absolutely no painful sacrifices. I mean, we used to joke constantly about not having a budget, but it was always a positive challenge. And we had to be really curious and really creative and innovative. And something probably above all else, we had to be brave and reach out to our network and our network's network, because you have to find really cool people. When you don't have a budget, you have to find people that can help you. And also you have to find people who can help you for free and are willing to come and do that. You know, in my experience, if people think you're really passionate about what you do and you're really passionate about what they do, they will often willingly come and help you with what it is you're trying to achieve. And we had that in bucket loads at Thomas Cook. But the pivotal moment for me, the most creative spur on to not having a budget but doing great stuff was probably the first year that we participated in National Learning at Work Week. And if you haven't heard of that before, it's hosted every year in the third week in May. It's hosted by the Campaign for Learning, and they have some brilliant resources actually on their website. So even advertising materials, you can download the free advertising materials they have on there. You can customize them for your own program that you want to put on during Learning Week, and you can get posters, and you can get all sorts of really cool stuff that you can put on digital wall boards, and kind of all over the place really. And that's what we did. So we got a working party together, a steerco, and we'd had in 2016, we'd done this strategic review of learning and development, and one of the things that had come up was people didn't really know what we had on offer enough, and they wanted to see their L&D department doing more to help improve and increase employee engagement, but they also wanted the learning offer that we had to be linked more to KPIs, particularly for people managers, and they wanted us to be putting things on that would really help them understand the company mantra and what it meant of putting customer at our heart. And for us, we wanted to create that learning culture, and we thought the Learning at Work Week might give us a springboard to do that. And so that's what we did. So we used the free learning materials, the advertising materials for Learning at Work Week, which were on the Campaign for Learning's website. And we reached out to our nearest and dearest friends and the friends of their friends, and we pulled together at very short notice, we did this within 6 weeks, we pulled together a programme of face-to-face learning sessions. We also had used our learning management system extensively, so we pulled out all of the best e-learnings that we had that fitted in with what people had said they wanted more of, and we used our advertising campaign to raise awareness about those. We also put on competitions, and we got some internal sponsorship from some of our suppliers and the internal product teams that work with suppliers, so free sunglasses, free suntan cream, working for a holiday company, sometimes you get those type of things. And we also did for the first time some live broadcasts using WebEx. Now, we'd done that before, but not to the whole organisation. So it was actually quite a brave thing to do. And we didn't do the content ourselves. We actually reached out to a partner organisation that had been used to support customer experience transformation. And it was a company called Commotion. And we reached out to Commotion and said, look, we know you can't come into our office to deliver any training for us. You've been a fantastic partner in the past. Would you consider doing a 45-minute WebEx? And we'll invite everyone in the organisation to join it. We'll have up to 100 people joining that if you'd be willing to broadcast. And they said yes. So that was great. And we also had TAO leadership that came and did a session on the latest research into the way that people learn and operate, particularly in contact centres. So we had a session from them on sociometrics. And then we had a really fantastic session on mindfulness from a consultant called Jennifer Cram. And mindfulness was really a hot topic, just coming to the front of everyone's mind. And of course, wellbeing at work is really important, and was to Thomas Cook. So it was amazing. We put a very blended suite of training on. And we also opened up a live chat facility on our learning management system. So we ran 13 face-to-face training sessions. We just had so much traction with that. We had 374 live chats. I'm just looking at some of the stats that we had, and we had hits on our learning management system during our first learning week went up by 37% and stayed there for a very long time afterwards. And we've got some amazing, it's not just about the numbers with learning though, is it? Yes, it's about the numbers, but sometimes it's got to be about the way people feel about the experience. Of course, we reached out for feedback, and we did a retrospective review after the event. And, colleagues were still talking about that first learning week 6 months after the event. And one colleague referred to it as inspired. And they said the events were so many and so varied, it was almost impossible to come up with an excuse not to go on something. And, I just think that's incredible. And the particular person whose team that this person was on, the manager of this team, 12 members of this manager's team attended sessions during Learning Week. So really helping to create that learning culture right from the bottom to the top and all the way back down again. And the other thing that we did, which was great during Learning Week and which was free again, was just created some brilliant expert panel interview sessions. So we reached out to the director for retail and contact centres. We reached out to the director for learning, talent and resourcing. And then we also reached out to the group head of resourcing, who had recently won an award for being one of the top 30 under the age of 30 in travel. And we interviewed them about how to have an amazing career as a woman in travel. And that went down an absolute storm. And we did several of these. And just one last thing that I want to share with you about learning on a budget that we did during this first National Learning Week was TC Cinema Presents. So we decided we would try to do a pop-up cinema. And so my online design team scoured TED and TEDx talks, and they just looked for the best TED and TEDx talks that aligned with what people had told us they wanted more of, and the KPIs and the leadership themes that had come from that learning and development strategic review that we did earlier in the year. And people came in droves. They brought a drink, they brought their lunch, and we provided popcorn. And that was the sole sum of our budget. It was £50 to put on this week-long event with all these brilliant external speakers and everything else. The 50 quid, it went on popcorn for TC Cinema Presents, our pop-up cinema theatre. And it was just a raging success. And actually, the year that we did that, the very first year that we did that, and they run their own awards, the Campaign for Learning. So if you do participate, you can apply for one of a number of different rewards. But one of them is the Open University Business School Learning at Work Week Impact Award. And this particular one is for supporting business and organisational goals. And, in 2016, we won that award. And we were so proud to do that. And we did it on a £50 budget.
One thing that particularly struck me when I saw you talking at Learning Live on a panel was that you used Facebook, not the workplace version of Facebook, but domestic Facebook and people with domestic accounts in the learning. Can you describe exactly how that worked?
Well, John, this was a really interesting one because following the success of our first National Learning at Work Week, we did an agile retrospective review of the Learning Week. We'd never done anything like that before, so we needed to do a retrospective. And I'm a big believer in doing retrospective reviews after every learning intervention or significant learning intervention that you put in place, whether it's a long, slow burn piece or something shorter and more agile like Learning Week was for us. And what came out of that was that whilst our retail network, which was at the time 600 stores, distributed network, 6,000 colleagues out in that network at that time, they had said they did like the e-learning and they did enjoy the competitions, but that it was actually quite difficult to engage in some of this stuff because, of course, you never know when a customer's going to come into a store, and if you put customer at our heart, then that's your priority. So the learning was a bit stop-start for them, and the engagement and interaction was as well. And actually some of those great poster campaigns that we'd done to advertise the event at our head offices and our contact centre in Scotland hadn't reached the retail network, quite understandable. So the following year, we reviewed the retrospective and remembered this, and we also remembered that we had done this WebEx, and although not many people from retail had attended, some of them had, and they'd given us really good feedback. And we thought, well, what if we could do something like that again, but at scale? And, sometime previous, I had reached out to a gentleman called Stefan Thoma, who at the time was the Global Director for Learning and Talent at Google. And he had shared with me very generously some of the insight and innovation that he had done whilst in this role at Google. He'd moved on at the point I spoke to him. One of the things he'd done was a model called G2G, Googler to Googler, where actually the learning and development team just kept hold of what he considered the crown jewels of learning. So induction, some upskilling in technical areas, and then some soft skills and management and leadership development. Everything else, he felt his team didn't have the expert knowledge or capacity to take on. And so his team had created a network of Googler to Googlers, G2Gers, who received a bit of training in how to create really great video tutorial content and work with colleagues. It was a peer-to-peer learning network. And I'd literally never seen anything like this before. And he had got them to broadcast their learning tutorials using a YouTube channel. And so we're sitting around, we're having this chat about what could we do to get learning out to this distributed network of stores where they've got very poor bandwidth, their equipment isn't brilliant, and you never know when a customer's going to come in, so scheduling learning is actually really difficult. And one of my team came up with the idea of setting up a closed Facebook channel. And we thought, well, we should launch this as part of our 2017 Learning at Work week. Fail fast, innovate, and all that good stuff. Can we do it on a shoestring? Well, we could do it for free, we discovered. So we set up a closed group, and we did have to get some sanction from some of the compliance teams, but that was fine. They checked our locked down site, and we would work with HR, and we would take the new joiners and the exit list every month, and we would make sure that we didn't have anyone on that site that shouldn't be on there. And then we reached out to our heads of retail and all of the senior people in the retail network, and we said, we need your help. Can you go out to your teams? We're going to do this thing. Can you ask them what they want learning and development on? If we were going to give them some really great content, what would it look and feel like? Well, they came back with a beautiful shopping list of things that they wanted. They wanted some product training. They wanted to get expert speakers from some of their partner suppliers, such as Disney or some of the cruise liners. They wanted competitions. They wanted broadcast content that was short, sharp, snappy, that they could access at any time and on any device. And so our Facebook page was born. And what we did was we reached out again to that all valuable network of suppliers, partners, and so on. Some were internal, some were external. And we said to them, look, Facebook Live has just started. It literally just come about in 2017. So we said, well, we must use this. But if you're scared about going live on Facebook, don't worry, because actually we can record you in our green room studio, and we can schedule a playback of that video so it looks like it's live, but the condition is you must be available to do a live Q&A after your video is played. Well, people had no problem with that. They're perfectly happy to answer questions. They were a bit more nervous about not getting it quite right on a live broadcast, but really happy to record something even on an iPhone and send it in to us. And we scheduled a week-long schedule of broadcasts, and it went down an absolute treat. I mean, colleagues loved it. And although most of the broadcasts were done in that first year during office hours, what we discovered from looking at Facebook analytics was that our colleagues were actually consuming the videos on the Play Again service that you get with domestic Facebook. So they were already on Facebook. So it was a great place for us to be doing this. They were there in the evenings. They were doing their socials. And they were curious enough to go in and have a look at what we'd broadcast during the day. And they consumed it at breakfast. And they consumed it after tea. And it was brilliant. So in following years, when we were doing broadcasts, and we didn't just limit it after that, of course, to National Learning Week, we could then ramp up tutorials for peak trading periods. For example, on the run up to Christmas, the travel industry does most of its business in January and February. So we would get all of that great content out to them and prepare them for being fantastic sellers during peak trading periods. And it just worked a treat. And we just got such brilliant traction with us and continued to do so. I mean, we had thousands, literally thousands of followers on domestic Facebook. And in some of those later broadcasts, we actually did broadcast live in the evenings, because we knew that when people got a call to action, a ping on their phone that says, Caroline L&D or one of my team are live on Facebook, that they would just tune in for 5 or 10 minutes, and they didn't mind giving up their personal time, and they didn't mind using their personal device. And that was a revelation, because there's a lot of people in traditional businesses in particular that will tell you, if you don't book people away from their day job to learn, if you don't give them a company device to learn on, they won't do it. Well, that just wasn't the case. It wasn't the case, and I don't believe it is the case. And I think now you see people really engaging in learning all over the place, all over the time, whether it's at home, whether it's on LinkedIn or via Facebook or some other media, they're doing it all the time. And I think that for me was the point where I thought, my goodness, we've created a learning culture. It's really started, and that was great.
So despite all your creativity and good work reflected in the business metrics you've told us about, you unfortunately weren't able single-handedly to turn the fortunes of Thomas Cook around, Caroline. But there was some industry recognition of your results, wasn't there?
So the Contact Centre Training Experts team won 2 amazing awards at the 2018 Training Journal Awards. So they got bronze in the category of best training team of the year, and they actually won gold for the best change programme in 2018. So we could not have been more delighted. And what a great example of developing a flexible, really inexpensive training team of expert trainers and subject matter experts. Couldn't have been happier with that. I'm immensely proud of what my team's achieved in the 3.5 years I worked with them. They won 7 awards, it's incredible. They've competed against the best L&D teams in the UK and Europe, and all of it on a zero budget. And £50 for popcorn, that's the sum total. But I also feel really lucky. I worked for a line manager whose directive to me when I joined was to innovate and bring fresh L&D and a new approach and portfolio to the UK business. And that helped immensely in just giving me the freedom, the flexibility and permission to push the boundaries. And I think, I hope that everyone has an opportunity to work for someone who is able to lead them in that way and give them the freedom and empowerment to create great stuff, even if it is on a zero budget.
And it sounds like Innovate is exactly what you did. And that's a very inspiring story. And I'm sure you'll take all those skills and ideas onto your next role, which I'm sure won't be very far away. Just finally, to wrap things up, what are your top tips for doing great, award-winning, innovative learning and development on a budget, on a very tight budget?
I have probably 3-ish top tips on keeping it cheap, John. The first one is understand your business and, really understand your business. Understand the problems they're facing, the ambitions they have, the restrictions they're working with, and the opportunities that present themselves for you to deliver commercial learning solutions. Doing great research, building great relationships will cost you nothing, and it will deliver results in bucket loads. My second tip is identify and engage your internal and external stakeholders. And I would encourage people to do that more than you think you're going to need to. You can't do it alone when you've got no money. You're going to have to beg, steal, and borrow talent and resources from every area of your business and beyond. But that will give your solutions more credibility in the long run. I've found often that internal experts, when you come to review the result, the colleagues like to hear from an internal expert even more than an external expert. So don't worry about not always having an expensive external person coming in. Sometimes the best, most credible speakers are the ones already in your business, and they'll be happy to help you, I promise. And then I think my third top tip would be really understand your assets. So really explore what assets you've got available to you, whether it's the really great people in your team who might have a hidden talent you don't know about, the software portfolio that's at your disposal that you might not have had the time to fully explore, and that could be your e-learning authoring tool, or it could be your underutilized LMS. And then, you might be like we were and have a big unused cupboard somewhere on your estate, and it might make a great green room for you to prop up a couple of old cameras and a boom mic and create some amazing video content for your online design team to work magic with. The world of work is often full of hidden gems, and you can create magic on a really tight budget with that. But I think above all, John, it's important to be curious and be brave and beware of the naysayers, because there's going to be people that are going to tell you it can't be done, that you'll build it and no one's going to come, that there's no appetite for learning or for digital or for change, that there's already too many XYZ champions networks in place and the one you want to set up isn't going to work, or no one's going to help you for free, or that no one's going to use their personal social media account for work, or even consume content outside of office hours or on a personal device. But trust me, I've heard it all. So to create really great 21st century learning on a budget, you just need to be bold, be brave, always curious. And if you can do that, you'll create great L&D.
That's all on the Learning Hack podcast for this time. Huge thanks to Caroline Ford, our guest, and to our founder sponsor, Earthly Systems. The Learning Hack is completely independent of any vendor, company or body, transparently funded by sponsorship. So if you want to help us sustain it into the future, please make sure to like and subscribe, and it's important, if you want to help other people to find us as well, to give a 5-star rating on whatever platform you get your podcasts from. You can reach me at John Helmer on Twitter or through my website, johnhelmerconsulting.com. Coming up on the Learning Hack, we have Dr. Ben Betts of Learning Pool and James Cook of IBM, among many others. See you later.
Now I finally get it.
Thank you very much. That's been a really inspiring interview, really interesting, and I'm sure people have got an awful lot for that. Thanks a lot for that. So now I'm off for some popcorn and a cup of tea.
John, thank you so much. Absolute pleasure to speak to you. And here's to the Learning Hack.
Cheers. Thank you.